Welcome to my channel, Kevin. Here we're going to interview you, asking you a few questions on a few topics. Could you go ahead and introduce yourself to me for me?
Yes, hello. My name is Kevin. Well, I don't know. I'm being interviewed today. Let's see. For the most part, I do have my own YouTube channel, known as the Liberal Hammer. I have my history up until this point. I have a long history of being involved as an activist in the LGBT community. I considered myself once much more left-leaning. Like I said, very involved in the activism. Then over the past couple of years, I've noticed the left take a direction that I was not particularly fond of, especially within the LGBT community. So since then, I've kind of focused on highlighting that. That doesn't mean that I now consider myself necessarily right-wing or conservative. I just kind of saw the side that I once had a connection to, that I once saw, even as a home, a community, take a path that I'm not a fan of. And like I would with any friend or family, I highlight that and I'm like, okay, I got to call you out on this.
Right.
So that's kind of where I am.
Excellent. And so you come out as openly gay on your Facebook. Could you explain what it's like to have to grow up gay, and like when did you find out that you were gay, and where do you stand on the LGBT rights, politically speaking?
So for me, it's interesting because I actually speak at a local college regarding the LGBT community, and I speak usually at least twice a semester. Usually, there's a professor who has me come, sociology professor, and how I always answer that question when people are like, when did you know you were gay? It's interesting because I actually, my smart ass response used to be, well, when did you know you were straight? But now I'm like, well, what question are you actually asking me? Are you asking me when did I know I was gay? Or are you asking me when did I know I liked guys? Because that's two different questions.
Right.
When I was, because obviously I didn't always understand there was a sexual component to it, but I knew I liked the other boys in a way that I didn't like the girls when I was like 4 years old. I didn't, my first crush I remember, his name was Josh. I was 6 years old. He was about 5, 6 years old. His family were a local sheep farming family. They owned a lot of land. He played the guitar, grew the biggest pumpkin in the 4-H, pumpkin growing contest. Yes, I grew up very country, by the way. 4-H club, all that stuff out there. I grew up in like the Amish and dairy country of New York State.
Oh wow.
So yeah, I didn't know the exact term for it, or at least I didn't understand the exact term for it until I was probably around 13 when puberty hit, because that was when the boys started really focusing on the girls in a way that I was like, nah. I was like, well, I want to focus on the boys in the way that they're focusing on the girls. That was when I understood, and that, I mean, I had obviously heard the term gay before, but I had heard it mostly like kind of a slang thing. So it wasn't until that point when I really understood that, hey, that's me. I remained closeted for a long period of time. It was probably like around my senior year of high school when I started slowly coming out and stuff like that. Fully came out in college, of course, because that's the traditional story there. And then it was also in college where I started to become politically active, because the first college I went to did not have an active gay-straight alliance, so I actually was a co-founder there. And that is what really also started to introduce me into politics, because one of the things I wanted more than anything was to one day get married to the man that I'd fall in love with. And growing up in a big family, I actually I'm second to the youngest out of 18 kids. I have
18 kids?
siblings. I have 17 siblings, 5 from an adoptive family and 12 biological siblings.
Oh, wow.
So I witnessed a lot of weddings, a lot of like family growing up, and I wanted that for myself, and I wanted it recognized in the nation of my birth, just like my siblings had theirs recognized. So that really is what kind of kicked off my political interest. I really wasn't political up until that point, more so because my family wasn't political. They weren't necessarily either really focused on being conservative or liberal, Democrat, Republican. Both my mother and my father kind of had the stance on politics in general was, what's the point? They're all crooked as hell anyways. That was pretty much what I grew up with. So politics wasn't a focus until I got on my own, and I realized the role that politics did play in my life. Whether or not I liked politics, that didn't change the fact that it played a role in my life. I learned that, when in college, and I was like, okay, so if I want to change how it impacts my life, I have to care about it and I have to get involved.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Interesting. And on your YouTube channel that you mentioned earlier in the beginning, what do you usually talk about?
So I will admit, I do focus a lot on the community. I focus a lot on things that I think where the community has gone a little bit nutty. I do talk about other issues outside of the community, such as feminism and stuff like that. But my activism, my experience on the left, my connection to the left was deeply rooted in the LGBT community. So that was my jumping off point. I'm currently working on new material that isn't so much focused on that, but that's still, we are a product of our experiences, and we usually come at things from a perspective that we've experienced, and for me that has been with the LGBT community, especially the disarray that it's experiencing now, and friends who no longer consider themselves really connected to it, or never have considered themselves connected to it because they never saw themselves reflected in it. So my channel kind of really is calling out. I have a few videos. For example, one of my videos actually has to do with Desmond, the young boy that's a drag queen, the whole drag kid culture thing going on there. And it's following that incident where he was at a club at 4 a.m. in the morning, performing, getting dollar bills thrown at him.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, this is child abuse. And what was interesting is on Twitter, I was actually brought into a discussion by someone, by another YouTuber. He brought me into a discussion where he was going back and forth with a very woke feminist about the topic, where she was saying, he has no right as a straight man to speak on gay culture, blah, blah, blah. So he mentioned me, and I was like, yeah, I'm token. So I came in, and it was funny because what I was really talking about, I was like, okay, here's how I look at this. I'm actually a fan of drag shows. I enjoy them. I have friends who perform, but it's because of that I very much know that drag culture is an adult culture. It's very coarse, very crude. It is not a place for a child. And I absolutely considered these parents bringing their 10, 11-year-old boy to a club to perform with grown men throwing dollars at him as he performed on stage at 4 a.m. in the morning to be a form of child abuse. And when I was interacting with this feminist, I actually brought up a point that I knew she couldn't refute, and I knew she'd go other ways, such as saying that I suffered from internalized homophobia and all this stuff. Was I said, okay, I also view beauty pageants this way for little girls, right? I'm like, so I got a question. Because drag is a very sexualized art. Most of the time, it is now a very sexualized art. It's about that expression and stuff. And I was having that discussion. I'm like, okay, so I do not support the sexualization of children, and that's also why I don't support those beauty pageants where young girls are made up, put on display in a very adult, sexualized fashion. And I know that most feminists are against beauty pageants, actually, for little girls. So I'm like, you support this, but do you support the little girls doing beauty pageants?
Mm-hmm.
And she refused to answer it. That was when she kept throwing internalized homophobia and all, different terminology. And I'm like, I'm great, you're very woke, but can you answer my question? And eventually she just blocked me because everything she threw at me I was like, that's wonderful. Can you answer my question? That's wonderful. Can you answer? And that's what you have to do with these very woke SJWs, is you can't let them take control of the discussion, because once you do, you've lost it, because then they'll bring you down an emotional roller coaster, twists and turns, and ain't nobody got time for that.
Mm-hmm.
So I was very focused on that. And also, I mean, aside from the beauty pageants, if I had heard that someone had brought a 10, 11-year-old girl to a straight bar and had her on the pool table dancing or performing with dollars getting thrown at her at 4 a.m. in the morning, I'd be pissed about that as well. This is not, this wasn't a gay or a straight thing or anything. This was a child being put in a situation that's absolutely inappropriate. And I consider that a form of child abuse. Now, what's interesting is I made that video, and then I didn't even know it, but apparently I got reported for, what was it, a trademark thing or something like that. Oh, what was it? I'm trying to remember the exact term. However, so they reported it, and I was like, but I didn't actually reference anything. My videos are just me speaking. I didn't really quote anything. It was just fully my opinion, like so many other YouTubers. And then I get an email saying it's been resolved, and I'm like, okay, people can view the video again. But yeah, so that's like one of the videos I have is about that. I also have videos where I criticize the left in general, and why I now, while I still consider myself fairly liberal, I certainly don't consider myself a leftist, is because I saw the left become a lot less liberal, at least in the traditional sense, than what I remember, in many ways, such as, for example, one of the big issues was freedom of speech for me. The freedom of speech movement was very much a liberal movement, and to see many of my friends on the left, suddenly attack free speech. I remember when our message was, we may not agree with what you have to say, but we'll fight for your right to say it. And to be honest, if someone has an opinion that I consider hateful, that I really want to actually highlight that. I want to debate this individual. That's what we used to do. And now, hate speech, and that's another thing, is this thing of hate speech that exists. But the problem is that you have the left has a very broad definition of hate speech. Basically, hate speech is anything they don't agree with. And their default is to call you a Nazi or to call you a white supremacist or whatever. And it's interesting because, I mean, what is it? They call Dave Rubin, a gay Jewish man, a Nazi, which is a very interesting thing. But it's pretty the default of the left now. So, and a few things just so I can reference is, I got called a white supremacist, a white supremacist, for simply saying this. And this was something that I had spoken on the left with before, and this is something I remember us agreeing upon, was to say that by the very definition of the word, and I mean the definition of the word itself, anyone can be a racist, by its definition. And someone called me a white supremacist, and they're like, well, no, racism is about power. You need power to be racist. I'm like, no, not by the definition. If you're talking about power, racism from a place of power, that's institutionalized or systemic racism, which are their own terms, but they're not the basic definition of racism. And they're like, well, no, people of color can be prejudiced, but not racist. And I'm like, prejudice is in the definition of racist. So once again, come at me, and they're like, but there's all this context, and I'm like, no, if we cannot agree upon the definitions of the words that we use to communicate, then all hope for a productive dialogue will be lost. If we cannot agree on the definitions of the words that we are using when we speak to each other, being racist by its definition, anyone can be. That, you see your own race as superior to another. Anyone can feel that way. Now, systemic and institutionalized racism, I don't want to necessarily get into discussions of the merits of that here. That is a different discussion, and that is about power, racism coming from a place of power in a society. So I'm like, you choose your words wisely and use them correctly, because if you don't, I'm going to highlight that. And so that got me labeled by someone a white supremacist. I made a video about that because I thought that was very amusing. Another thing for me was just the messaging in general on the left. I remember when the message was, and I remember being involved in, as an activist, was racism is wrong. It's wrong to be racist. Generalizing when it comes to a race is wrong. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. But all white people are natural-born bigots. Huh? What?
Yes, like
Sexism is
what?
wrong. Sexism is wrong. But masculinity is toxic. Wait, what? I agree sexism is wrong, but then you're generalizing all men? And I was like, and it was just weird. Homophobia is wrong. Hating someone based on their sexual orientation is wrong. But these straight people need that. And I'm like, okay. And then, transphobia is wrong, but cis people this. And I was just like, wow. And it was interesting because I saw this and I saw that I was like, you do realize you are becoming a reflection of everything you have claimed to stand against. And I've said this to a number of friends, and I've lost friends. And don't get me wrong, I actually was once a little bit with them. I went a little bit far left on my own. I even made a Dear White People video once, which, oh my goodness, that's for a whole nother time.
So since you brought up politics, before we jump into that, you brought up child abuse, which I thought was interesting earlier. What is your stance on both transgender children and trans athletes?
All right, so here's the thing. This is on the issue of transgender children. This is where I have been called transphobe. I've been called transphobic for a few issues on a few issues, is because I don't support young children actually full transitioning. I don't. The science, especially when you're talking about hormone blockers and those kind of things, something where the science is not there. The long-term effects we do not know, and the fact that when studies have shown that with gender confusion, that a lot of children do eventually adjust and feel comfortable with the sex that they were born. So I don't support children actually transitioning. However, and this is interesting because someone once said to me, and they thought they had a gotcha moment. They were like, oh, so you're against trans kids, but you're okay with gay kids. Like with gay kids, because I'm a gay man. And I'm like, okay. So, so you're against the kids saying that they're trans, but you're fine with the kids saying they're gay. And I'm like, no. I never said that I had an issue with a child saying that they're trans. If a child can absolutely say that they feel, a little boy can absolutely say that he feels that he is a girl, or a little girl can say that she feels that she's a boy. My thing is in the action, because here's the thing: even if a young kid says that they are gay, I'm not going to tell them. I'm not going to push them to experience it, to go out and fool around, am I? No, they're a child. They're a child. If a little boy or a little girl tells me they have a crush on someone who happens to be the same sex as them, I'm not going to encourage them to act on it, no more than I would if a little girl told me she had a crush on a little boy, because I don't believe in sexualizing children. So a child could tell me that they feel that they are the opposite sex, and my response would be like, okay, you feel that way, you have a long life ahead of you. When you get older, you will know who you are, and you will embrace that fully. But I'm not going, I'm not going to tell them, oh yeah, I'm going to push you into hormones and all this stuff. So I don't support children transitioning, because also it's irreversible. The one thing, at least, and this is it's because being gay, the one thing where there is obviously that distinction is being gay doesn't require a permanent alteration to your body if you go through the full thing, and this is my concern, is that if there is regret, that's my thing. Is a small child, children desire a lot of things when they're young. And my concern, especially as someone who wants to be a parent, is I want my child to have as little regret in their life as possible. So something such as altering their body irreversibly, possibly, in a long-term way, is something that I couldn't support when my child becomes an adult. Absolutely. When my child is grown and if they make that decision, and that's the thing, is that so I've been called transphobic, and I don't see that as necessarily transphobic. I see that as allowing a child to develop on their own, and then once they become an adult, allowing them to take that, what they feel their identity is, and explore that on their own, and not pushing them in any fashion. Because I actually do have a video where it says, "What if my parents were SJWs?" kind of thing, if they were social justice warriors. And what I kind of cover is, I remember when I was little, and I remember a few things that were very funny. Is one of the things was when my oldest sister was pregnant. I was like 4 years old. I remember asking my mother, I was like, "When am I gonna have a baby?" So like, I remember asking this. Mind you, I don't understand how the sexes work at that age also. And my mother was like, "Boys can't get pregnant. Only girls can." And I remember being very upset by this, because I thought it was cool that I could feel the baby kick, and I thought it was a very cool thing, And I remember that. I remember being very upset by that, the fact I could not have babies. And I remember little things, like I remember my sister had this long robe, and I remember putting it on and spinning around like it was a gown, right? And little things like that. Like, I did little things. And I played with trucks, but I also played with dolls as well. So I wonder if I had parents who were so woke, if they had seen these things and thought, "Oh, maybe he's trans, maybe he is actually a she," and had pushed towards that. No, I'm just a man. I happen to be a gay man. I'm very comfortable with him. So it's just my nerves. My worry is how this can also be abused. Because there are also people who are very set on the type of child they want. So what if someone really hopes for a daughter, or really hopes for a son, but was given to them is the sex that they didn't want, the opposite? If we now allow children to transition, what happens when that parent is like, "Well, I can now easily get the child I want, the sex that I want"? And I know some people say, you're going into a worst case scenario, but there was a case not too long ago out of Texas, I haven't followed it in a couple months, with a father in a custody battle with his wife over their son. And he happened to be a twin. What was interesting is the wife wanted the boy to transition, wanted to acknowledge the child as a girl, and the father was like, "No." And they even brought in a counselor, a third party. And what was interesting is that when the child was with the mother, the child identified as the girl and used the girl name. When the child was with the father, the child identified as a boy, self-identified, would refer to himself as a boy, and use the boy name. So the fact is, it really came off as the child was trying to please both parents. So this is one of the situations that makes me nervous. Now, like I said, I absolutely support grown adults doing with their body as they wish. I know a number of trans people. I've met a number of trans people in my activism, and they are amazing people who made a decision as an adult to transition, to take on an identity they felt fit them, and I absolutely support them in that journey. But like I said, it is especially if you go all the way, it is a permanent alteration to your body that you cannot fully undo. So I just couldn't support that with a child. Now, in regards to trans athletes, this is an interesting subject for me, because one thing I am aware of from my work with the trans community is obviously the effect that hormones eventually have on the body. For a trans woman, someone who is born biologically male, and once the hormones get to a certain point, bone mass is lost, bone density is lost, muscle mass is lost. These are things that happen over a period of time. Now, but when is that time frame going to put them on a similar level to biological women? Or does it ever really do that? And I know there's now testing for testosterone and stuff like that. So, so I really, though, I think where I am is, first of all, I know this much. I don't support someone trans being, like a trans woman, being in a sport with biological women if you've only been trans for like 6 months or a year. You still, despite the hormones, you still have a lot of that advantage there. That's for sure. Also, if it was to take place, for me, you would have to actually have transitioned, to still have the testicles, to still, be producing that natural testosterone in the fashion like that, in those higher quantities. If you are, that is obviously, that puts you at an advantage. So where I am is I know when I certainly don't agree with it. But the thing is, like, with the science, where is that cutoff line? And I'm honestly, I don't have a set opinion on it. If it's a trans woman, who's transitioned for an extended period of time. But what's interesting, though, is how often, where trans women obviously do excel above biological women. However, there are also examples, like I know there was a cyclist one not too long ago, where the cyclist, she won and everything, but then she also highlighted that she had lost several races prior to that, right? So maybe she just happened to win this one.
Right.
I don't know. And what's interesting, though, is that we're really focused on trans women in women's sports, sports that have been historically biologically women. But what's also interesting is that then on the reverse end of that, because there's also another case, I believe it was out of Texas, where there was a trans boy who was wiping the floor, literally, on wrestling teams, going against girls. And they were flipping out about this. But I'm like, the thing is, though, the school doesn't allow the student to wrestle with the boys because they're biologically female.
Mm-hmm.
So you've kind of created that one yourself there. Is, the child wants to play sports. But so I don't think there's ever going to be as big of an issue with trans men in sports that tend to be biologically male, because trans men will always be seen as having the disadvantage, right? Mm-hmm. So they transition from female already having been physically weaker biologically. Just biologically, just naturally, weaker, less muscle mass, so on and so forth, and they transition. So they'll be seen coming at it from a disadvantage. So I don't think trans men in sports will ever really be a focus. I think it's obviously going to be a continued focus on trans women in sports. And like I said, where that line is drawn, I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know if that's enough for you there, where I kind of stand with that.
You mentioned the whole, they have to have been transitioning for like a year or two, or, they actually have gone through like the medication and all that. Where do you stand with the Fallon Fox situation, where former UFC fighter Fallon Fox had been fighting women? She's the one who's known for knocking out the women and wiping the floor. I think she was undefeated for a while. Where do you stand on that? Because I think she actually was secretly trans at the moment, and she had been transitioning for, I think, over a year or so.
Yeah. Well, that's the interesting thing, is where the science stands with that. Obviously, the problem is that when it comes to hormone levels, when it comes to stuff like that, we're all unique. I've known enough trans people to where the hormones affect them at different rates. I've seen, especially for trans women. I've known a number of trans women where they start the hormones and it's like, oh my god, in a month, it's just like things start really progressing fast, and then I've seen it where it seems like it's taking longer. So that's another thing that makes this more complicated, is how our bodies respond to things, and not just in relationship to being trans, but how our bodies adjust to things that we do to them differs from person to person. So that cutoff point where a trans woman's hormone levels and bone density and muscle mass would have decreased enough to put them a little bit more in line with a biological woman, that will probably differ for each trans woman, and that adds a complication to this. I don't think a year is enough for that, or even a year and a half, or even two, to be honest, even 2 years, from what I've seen in general. So I do believe, plus, while she may be transitioning, or even if she is on the hormones, right, she's doing things that still help her natural biological male advantage. The working out, all that stuff, the muscle, the ability to build muscle. Especially if it's only been about a year and a half, I'm pretty sure, like I said, I believe it's going to be different for everyone, but the men build muscle faster than women. So, biologically, so that's just a fact, and that's also one of the things. So, if her transition is really only a year and a half to 2 years, I definitely don't support her being in the ring with these women, with these biological women. And I really am curious because I'm not as familiar with that one. I have read up on it. But I'm not as familiar with the details in regards to how long she's been transitioning, what type of hormone she's on, and other things, and what else is she doing on the side. And how far is the transition as well? These are details I'm not as familiar with about that case.
Okay, thank you. 1 second, I gotta close my blinds. Okay. So we've covered LGBT rights, we covered trans athletes and trans children. I noticed that you seem to be a staunch believer of the Second Amendment. Am I correct?
Oh, yes, I am.
Could you explain your stance on that a little bit?
All right. So what's interesting for me is where I grew up. It was actually kind of a little bit of a culture shock. Like I said, I didn't grow up really involved in politics. That wasn't my family's way. However, I understood Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative. I understood those concepts. I just wasn't involved politically. I didn't pay attention to the political world around me, really. So where I grew up, out in small-town rural America, guns, whether you're liberal or conservative, at least where I was from, you had respect for the right to own a gun. If you didn't believe in owning a gun, you simply didn't own one. This was a view that where I was from, both liberals and conservatives generally had. It wasn't until I went to college and started getting political that I realized that it was a partisan issue in many ways that was more considered conservative. And so I was always very pro Second Amendment. And to be honest, I saw being pro-Second Amendment as a very liberal value as well. And a lot of people give me a strange look when I say that. And I'm like, well, hear me out for a moment, especially in this woke day and age where the left is going nuts about things. So if with liberal, if you're about progressiveness, if you're about, acknowledging discrimination and the danger faced by certain minority groups, historically especially. We can debate like currently, but if you're about so I'm like, okay, so you're talking about all these groups as being higher targets of violence and facing more discrimination, especially the violence. Gay men, that they'd be a higher target for violence, stuff like that. Especially, but you're then going to pass laws restricting their ability to defend themselves. How does that make sense to you? Because you also don't trust the police. So you're telling these communities to not trust the police. You planted a seed of distrust in these communities, the LGBT community, communities of color, even with some, with women to an extent. You've implanted this distrust on the left of police. Okay. So you've done that. So when acts of violence are being, performed against them, they don't trust the police. But then you're also taking away a method of defending themselves that is a great equalizer. A 50-year-old woman who's 5'3", 110 pounds is not going to be able to take on an intruder who's 6'3", a built male. This is not her owning a gun, her being able to defend herself. That is the equalizer.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, I saw it as a very liberal notion to believe in the Second Amendment, because you want communities, especially now. I'm not saying I want them to become gangs and go out there and fight, but you want people that you consider more likely to be targets of violence to be able to defend themselves if they have to. So to me, it was just a very odd notion to see a side, the left, which claims to stand for these groups and want to protect them, limit their ability to defend themselves. So I'm very pro Second Amendment for that reason. But also, I have to admit, what really set it off for me, because I always was very much a fan of the Second Amendment. However, I don't consider myself, I wouldn't call myself by any means a gun expert. I just support the Second Amendment. I am a gun owner. To me, I educate myself on the guns I want to own. I don't, I'm not a library up in here of gun knowledge, but right. I know the basics. So what was interesting to me is, for me, one of the big wake-up calls was the Orlando massacre, the Pulse nightclub massacre. This was a target on a community. What was interesting is that following that, though, there was a little bit of a spike of, an anti-gun sentiment in the community. But I knew a lot of people in the community who became gun owners following that massacre. 49 people in what was traditionally a place for members of the community to freely express themselves and be who they are, died. They were slaughtered. And this, to me, I was just like, wow. And for me, I wasn't there myself. I was actually out that early morning, though. I was actually celebrating my birthday on June 12th. So to me, it was also, wow, my friends and I, we just took back, we were like, this could have happened at any nightclub. This could have been any club, in the country. So that kind of reinforced it. And membership in the Pink Pistols rose. Same with, forgetting the name, Blazing Sword, Operation Blazing Sword, which those two organizations actually merged recently and are now one organization. Which I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Pink Pistols or Operation Blazing Sword, but they're both pro-gun LGBT organizations. Like I said, they merged, and now they're one organization that really advocates for gun rights, especially for those in our society that tend to be the most vulnerable. So I know that was a long roundabout, but I hope that was helpful in helping you understand why I'm so pro Second Amendment.
Right.
I see it as very important, and I don't understand how it's not seen as a liberal value as well to be pro Second Amendment.
Okay, a lot of people seem to be praising the New Zealand Prime Minister or the President, the leader of New Zealand, for pushing the ban of assault rifles in New Zealand. Where do you stand on that issue?
Alright, so when it comes to gun control laws, which I emphasize the control because that's what it's about, let's face it, control and eventually removal altogether. My problem is that you can remove all the guns you want. If someone wants to kill, they will kill. They will find a way. We have seen this in Europe. We've already seen this. I mean, what's Britain facing? Knife attacks, acid attacks on the increase. Increasing. They're talking about banning certain knives. I remember even I have a few friends over in Britain, and they were talking about. Possibly even making it so, you had to transport your cutting knives, your cutlery for your kitchen. You had to transport it locked up, pretty much. There's talks about this, and I'm like, it's because if people want to kill, they will kill. They will find a way to kill. They will use a vehicle, they'll use knives, they'll use that, and people are like, yes, but you lessen it. I'm like, so basically you're trying to put a Band-Aid on it. Instead of dealing with the source of violence in a culture, to try to address the issue at its source, you're going after the guns because you know it's easier. You know it's easier to villainize this weapon than it is to actually get your hands dirty and deal with what's wrong with your culture that is resulting in people who want to kill en masse. Because those people will kill en masse in other ways, even if you take away those guns. So that is my problem with gun control. And I do get a lot of people who think they have the gotcha questions. So one of my favorites is, so do you support the mentally ill owning guns? Now this I find interesting because for me, so I'm like, here's my problem, because they're like, well, what about common sense gun control laws? And to me, I'm like, common sense is certainly not so common in this situation. But I'm like, okay, so let's take this. Let's take mental illness, for example. My problem with gun control laws, well, I have a problem with them in general, but specifically the ones that I've read and followed that focus on mental illness, right? They have a very broad cover. It's a very paint with a very broad brush when it comes to what they consider mental illness. It doesn't specifically say those who are violently mentally ill, right? And the reason why I have a problem with that is because if you use such broad language, you are putting people, like, for example, being OCD is a mental illness. So being obsessive compulsive and needing order in your life is actually a mental illness. Should someone who's just extraordinarily organized to where it is a mental illness not be allowed to own a gun? Someone who has an eating disorder, that's a mental illness. But does that, just because they have an eating disorder and have trouble with a relationship with food, does that translate to the fact they shouldn't own a gun? It's a mental illness, and by your definition, the mentally ill shouldn't own a gun. And up until 1972, homosexuality was a mental illness, was considered a mental illness. So if these laws that you were pushing were in place then about mental illness, actually, I could have been considered under that. Someone could have actually seen it as, well, it's considered a mental illness, so this homosexual shouldn't own a gun. And I know recently the definition or how it's categorized for being transgender was changed. I know that was adjusted. I forget what it was switched to. But it's still labeled with, it was still, very much focused on as a mental illness.
Gender dysphoria.
Yeah, gender dysphoria. I know they recategorized it, so it doesn't fall exactly where it did before. But that's a very recent development.
Right.
So So that's considered a mental illness. So you're gonna then argue that trans people shouldn't own guns? This is my problem. Is it was so broad. They aren't specific. If you were saying the violently mentally ill who attack people, okay, I could work with you. But your definition is so broad to where someone that I was made aware of locally where I am, she had trouble getting a gun because she had dealt when she was younger with a diagnosis of ADHD. ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
And she's not being allowed to, she was struggling to get a gun, and she was dealing with an ex who was violent and had a history of abusing her. This was an ex who had threatened to kill her. She had a restraining order against this man, and she was having trouble getting a gun to defend herself against this man who is twice her size because of an ADHD diagnosis. Are you kidding me? So that's my problem with that. And then people go, okay, well, criminals. You don't want criminals owning guns. Once again, very broad in how you're applying this.
Before you get
Because
into that,
yeah.
you mentioned violent people who are mentally ill, and then you made the distinction between there are people who like OCD or ADHD who are denied guns because they are technically mentally ill. What about someone who has schizophrenia who has no prior history of having any violent attacks on anyone?
So here's the thing. I'm not a fan of punishing people for what they might do. That is a very dangerous. That is very dangerous territory. That is a slippery slope that I do not care to teeter on. I prefer not to. So someone who's been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and if it's initial, if there has been no history of violence, which usually though, at least having from my experience in the because I actually was at one point studying psychology a little bit. I mean, I'm by no means an expert on it, but many times the diagnosis is related to a violent outburst. So there are behaviors that tend to be violent or at least manic, unstable, that lead to the diagnosis. So there you actually have a behavior that shows a tendency towards violence and, just in general, complete chaos that I say would justify it. And it's difficult for me to say this because I had my brother who passed away at 19. He was schizophrenic. He would have violent outbursts. He had habits that he'd walk by a trash can and bang on the top of it and say Scooby-Doo for whatever reason. I was very young when my brother died. He died 2 days before my 7th birthday. So my memories of him, fortunately, I have more happy memories than anything else. Although my mother says that there was times when I was afraid of him as a little kid, and that my family had trouble. That's why he died in a men's group home, unfortunately. But he was very mentally ill, and he was schizophrenic. And no, I would not want my brother to have owned a gun. That would not have been. But what got him diagnosed was violent behavior that he was already displaying. So that's my thing. Is that usually there's already something there that would be covered by this when someone's diagnosed schizophrenic. At least what I've seen.
So the reason why I ask is because as someone who's been diagnosed with schizophrenia, who has no history of violent behavior, my question becomes, am I allowed to own a gun? Would people trust me with a gun? And a part of me feels if they would think I shouldn't own a gun because people are portrayed as being violent typically with schizophrenia, would that be fair or would it be justified?
No, I don't think that would be justified because, as I said, I do not believe in punishing people for something they have not done. If you have no history of violent behavior, until you prove otherwise, I'm going to trust in your individual freedom, your right to handle your own life, and if you can maintain your diagnosis and you're able to handle that, then yeah. But if you show a display of violence, like you freak out and punch someone in a store or something, right? Or if you have a violent action that's documented, then yes, that's justification. But until you do something that actually warrants that kind of action, absolutely not. I don't support people who are non-violent but have been diagnosed with schizophrenia being restricted from owning a firearm.
Well, it seems we're running out of time, so I do want to ask a few more questions. I'm curious where you stand with Donald Trump and what you think of his current policies.
So here's the thing. I will admit I went. Aw. I will admit with the election leading up to Trump was very interesting for me because I did go a little bit leftist nutty. I was very much, I drank a bit of the Kool-Aid, saw him as the next Hitler incarnate kind of thing. But actually, what was interesting is I didn't like Hillary either. The only reason I actually voted for Hillary, and the only reason, because I just did not like her at all, was because I will admit I wanted the Supreme Court to be more liberal leaning. I'm going to be honest there. However, actually, in a way, I'm still not a fan of Trump. I consider him basically, he has the emotional maturity of a toddler, and I don't see that as an attribute that I would favor in a president. Okay? However, in a way, him getting elected had a positive impact on me in regards to it woke me up out of my Trump mania because life went on, you know? Months passed, year passed. I wasn't in a concentration camp for gays. This is like life went on. Yes, there were certain policies that I was kind of like, And to be honest, my biggest issue was Mike Pence. I'm not personally, while I support religious freedom, absolutely, I very much am about separation of church and state. We definitely don't have enough time to go into that. So Mike Pence was my biggest there. As far as Trump, there's a lot that I don't like about him, but I don't consider him the reincarnation of Hitler by any means. I think that he says stupid shit. I think his Twitter is both amusing and sad to observe. I know recently where was it that he went? Was it in France where he went and he was over there like the George Washington's property over in Europe, and he had to be informed about George Washington, educated a little bit more about our first president, our founding father. So actually, Ben Shapiro was laughing at that. I watched show that was amusing. However, but there are certain things where I do agree. I will admit the whole build the wall thing. Initially, I generally didn't support the concept of building the wall. At least in the way, in the context it was being sold to me, because what was being preached to me was like this Great Wall of China concept. And I'm like, that is impractical in so many ways. I would say, talk about this big, beautiful wall. And I'm like, because first of all, border agents need to be able to see beyond the wall, the border. They need to be able to see what's coming. If you have a solid wall, that means you either have to have a walkway on the top of the wall, or you need to have it completely lined with cameras, or possibly both. I saw that as just not a fiscally smart thing, because I tend to be more fiscally conservative. However, the fence idea, I do support. And what's interesting for me is that where I stand on the issue of immigration is where Democrats used to stand. Nancy Pelosi voted for border fencing in the past. Chuck Schumer spoke very strongly on border control, and so did Obama. To a degree. Actually, Obama deported a large number of illegal immigrants during his presidency. Like his presidency was, throughout that. So so that's an area where I actually am coming more and more to agree with the administration, Trump's administration, having a focus on immigration. Although I generally do view both parties at fault here, because both parties have had many years to deal with our broken immigration system and our issues at the border, and neither one has done it in a successful way.
Mm-hmm.
Trump had both the House and the Senate for a while, and no comprehensive immigration reform was passed. So that right there is also another thing. So I do support a lot of what he says about it, but will it happen? I don't know. One area where I actually also kind of had agreed a little bit was there was a while back where it was the discrimination policy on federal contractors. Obama had that as an executive order, where federal contractors, they contract with the government, can discriminate based on sexual orientation or gender identity. Trump repealed that. He did an executive order, but he also repealed it. I'm trying to remember the exact wording because it didn't just cover that; it covered everything. So to me, though, I saw that as a little bit more. Okay, it's covering everything, right? Because the thing is that I want to be treated as an equal citizen in my country. So if there's protections out there for demographics, I feel like the community should be protected as well. If those protections don't exist for those demographics, then I'm completely fine with not having them either. My whole activism, my career in activism was about equality under the law, under the application of the law, not about any kind of special rights, as some people would try to claim, like they did when I was fighting for marriage equality. They would say, "Well, you're fighting for a special right." I'm like, no. If I was fighting for a special right, I'd be fighting to have my honeymoon paid for as well, which would have been nice because I've been married 3 years and still haven't been on a honeymoon.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But yeah, that was my main thing. And the marriage equality one was interesting because when I get down to the core of it, my belief with conservatives, I actually do give a lot of them an aha moment because what they'll say is government shouldn't be involved in marriage, and I'm like, okay, that's a fair argument, a point to make. But here's the problem. Government is involved in marriage. And since government is involved in marriage, and as a citizen under that government, I wanted equal access to a government institution that my brothers and sisters had, that my parents had, that everyone around me that was heterosexual had. I wanted access to those benefits so that I could build a strong family unit myself in the eyes, in this nation that was protected just like any other family. So that's what I was fighting for. If marriage had never been made a government thing, I absolutely would be like, okay, it's just a religious thing. I'm not looking to go get baptized, So that's, that would have been fine. But the fact is, government is involved in marriage. And what I found interesting from a lot of these people that would argue, well, government shouldn't be involved in marriage, was that they themselves had marriages that were government sanctioned. So you're a little bit of a hypocrite there. I did meet a few people who refused to get married because they didn't believe. They refused to have a government marriage because they didn't believe the government should be involved in marriage. And those people I could respect, at least. Even if I disagreed with them, I could respect them because they're practicing what they preach. And another thing that came out with that was people like, well, especially when we got near where it was victory, right? Like marriage equality became the law of the land. There were a lot of people near the end when state after state was passing same-sex marriage. Some states were like, oh, well, let's focus on civil unions. You could have gone for civil unions. We did. We went for domestic partnerships and civil unions, but those were also protested by the religious right. Even when we weren't, because one of the claims was that it was about the word marriage as well. No, it wasn't, because even when we weren't trying for the word marriage, when we were trying for, civil marriage or, the civil unions, domestic partnerships, this was really on display in Vermont, if I remember correctly, the signs of no civil unions. So they came out against that. So ironically enough, because to an extent we owe marriage equality, especially to the religious right, because they were so stubborn in not wanting to give us anything that they set us up to win everything. So to an extent, I kind of want to thank them because their extremism helped usher in marriage equality nationwide. So yeah, and like I said, marriage is a government-involved institution. That is the fact. And as even Ben Shapiro says, one of the big conservatives out there, facts don't care about your feelings.
What a perfect note to end on, too. Thank you again for coming to this interview, Kevin. I'm getting calls from Indian guys again, so I have to go ahead and cancel the thing. But I just want to say thank you for coming on. Thank you for explaining your views, and I'd love to have you on some other time.
Absolutely, I'd love to come on anytime. Just to let me know.
Okay.
Anyways, have a good evening.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Oh my God.